Welcome to Chapter 16 of The Divide. Please like and subscribe. Maddie and his class stood at the edge of the forest to the west. This part of the forest was dark and grimy, giving a much different and darker feeling than where Julia was training. Today's task is not about brute force, but precision and intellect, Mr. Minx began. He then pushed a button on a small remote which amazingly lit up the darkness in the forest with lasers from every side, all sliding and moving throughout the trees. You must navigate through the beams to capture the flag hanging on a tree, he continued. Stealth is key. Any breach, any touch by a laser, and you're out. Also, to add some spank in the tank, this is a partner task, so you are not only responsible for yourself, but also the other. Failure should not be an option, even if it takes you all day. Do not set off a laser, and both must arrive to capture the flag. Understood? All shook their heads in agreement, then went to find their partner. Maddie glanced at Hans, who was no doubt his partner, thinking, how on earth will Hansi's big butt make it through all these lasers? This is going to take us all day, Maddie thought. As the other teams dispersed, Mr. Minx handed them a small black device. This, he explained, is your only tool that you're allowed to use beyond the tree line. Use it wisely. The device was a simple mirror, small enough to fit in a pocket, and it could be used to help deflect a laser. Maddie turned to Hans and asked, So, what's your normal time for this? Any tips, Hansi? Hans stood there dead-faced, unwilling to reply. Well, that's encouraging, Maddie stated. Mr. Minx approached the boys and with a smirk entered the conversation. Hans has never fully completed the task. He usually stands here until school is finished, causing harm not only to his grade, but also his partners. Isn't that right, Hans? Yes, replied Hans reluctantly. Mr. Minx leaned in close to Hans in his normal creepy lean-in way and spoke. Your large size, although helpful in some ways, is harmful in this exercise. But it doesn't have to be. Maddie watched as Hans dropped his head in disappointment. Maddie then interrupted. Challenge accepted, Mr. Minx. We got this. Mirror, please. Mr. Minx chuckled to himself, passing Matthew the mirror. See you back here at 3 o'clock, Mr. Crane. That is, unless you both complete the task. Mr. Minx then walked over and sat down in front of a small cabin which served as a fire station. Maddie turned his attention to Hans to see a big pile of sadness lumped over. He felt bad for Hans. Matthew wasn't one to really care about grades, however, he did care about people. So he wanted more than ever for Hans to succeed. Maddie patted Hans on his back. Give me a minute, Hansi. We'll figure this out, he reassured as he began to scan the laser-filled forest. Maddie slowly paced up and down the tree line, searching for any way possible that they both could get through the maze of lasers. However, the more he looked, the more impossible the task had seemed. Hans was a mountain-sized boy, and even with a mirror reflecting away a laser here or there would be no way for them to make it through to capture the flag. Maddie stopped scanning the forest and looked back to Mr. Minx, whose eyes were keenly observing him. Why is he staring at me as if there's a puzzle he wants me to solve? Wondered Maddie. What sticks out? He asked himself as he refocused back to the forest. Everything seemed perfectly random, as any good laser field should be. And the forest, overgrown, dark and sloppy, it all looked normal. Except for one place. Matthew saw something of interest behind a tall tree at the edge of the forest. He walked over and he put his eye next to the tree and looked into the forest. He saw a straight line, a perfect narrow clearing from the tree where he stood, all the way to the tree holding the red flag. Of course, the clearing was covered with lasers all throughout, yet the lasers were placed low to the ground, nothing above knee height. Matty looked up at the tree he was standing next to. He then spoke to himself. It might be just tall enough. With a shine of hope in his eye, he trotted over to Mr. Minx to ask a question. Mr. Minx, what are the exact rules again for this exercise? The rules, Mr. Crane, are to capture the red flag while not letting a laser touch you or your partner. And the second you step 1 foot in the forest, the only item you are allowed to carry is a small mirror. What about using an item before entering the forest? Asked Matty as he spied the axe in the emergency firebox behind Mr. Minx. Ooh, that seems interesting, Mr. Minx replied. Like the timbre of my voice. Mr. Minx continued his strange and creepy laugh as Matty walked by to grab the axe out of the firebox. Mwahaha, Minx, Matty thought to himself, still trying to give his teacher an insulting nickname. Nope, still lame, he conceded. After grabbing the axe, Matty made his way back to a still lumped-over Hans. All right, Hansi, let's do it. Hans raised an eyebrow of skepticism, but followed Matty back to the tree. Matthew then explained the plan, pointing out the straight-line clearing with the low lasers and the tree that they would have to cut down. This tree, he tapped the trunk, this is going to be our bridge, and before you say it or don't, no other kid will die from a falling tree. Don't worry, they will never walk where all these lasers are. Well, unless they're dumb, then, well, maybe we did humanity a favor. Anyway, what do you think, Hans? Want to cut a tree down? Hans looked at the tree, then back at Matty with a slow grin spreading across his face. Axe, his voice rumbled, asking to cut down the tree. As Hans swung the axe with each chop, Matty could see how important this was to him. And eventually, with chop after chop, the tree began to creak and was almost ready to fall down. Now we need to push it at just the right angle, Matty said as he stepped back. Are you ready? Hans nodded, his hands ready to slash the tree one last time. Timber! Matty called out as Hans gave a final swing. The tree began to tower down, and it fell perfectly in the narrow clearing, aligning exactly with the lasers below. It landed with a thud, the branches breaking off, but the trunk stayed true, creating exactly what they needed, a makeshift bridge. Matty jumped onto the fallen tree, beckoning Hans to follow. Come on, big guy. Time to show those lasers who's boss. Hans, with far more grace than one would expect from someone his size, hopped on the tree and followed. They balanced footstep after footstep, walking carefully over the lasers that could have spelled their disqualification. Nearing the end of their makeshift bridge, the boys jumped down. The flag was within reach, fluttering slightly in the breeze, almost in salute to their victory. Matty turned to Hans. Go ahead, Hansi. It's yours. Hans grabbed it, holding it like a trophy. They turned to see Mr. Minx walking over the tree, now clapping slowly. The timbre of my voice, Mr. Crane, Mr. Minx said, his tone a mixture of amusement and respect. Then, turning his attention to Hans, Mr. Minx praised. Job well done, Hans. You cut the tree perfectly, allowing it to fall perfectly. You see, your size wasn't a disadvantage, but an advantage. You just needed a new perspective. Hans, who rarely says more than one word at a time, spoke up. "So, I passed?" "Indeed you did," Mr. Minx confirmed. "You both did." Hans walked over to Matty and slowly pushed his fist forward to him. "Fist bump?" he asked with what almost looked like a smile. "Fist bump," Matty replied in agreement.